They'll see your hands, December. Please. Just stay out here. My sister said that to me through a door with gold trim, 5 minutes before she married a man I'd never once been allowed to sit in the same room with. I was holding a bunch of tortillas I'd cut that morning from the scrubby patch behind the workshop, and she was right about the hands. I'd scrubbed them raw with swarfika the night before and the grease was still there, black under every nail, the way it always was, the way it always would be. Nobody told me who they were. Nobody needed to. My name's Declan O'Connor. 35 years old, from Merrickville, though the workshop where I'd spent half my life was out past Botany, hard against the container yards, where the air always tasted a bit like diesel no matter which way the wind came from. I ran O'Connor Mechanical. Did clutch jobs and gearbox rebuilds for trotties and taxi drivers and the odd bloke with a Torana he loved more than his missus. My hands hadn't been properly cleaned since I was about 19. There's a line of grease that lives under the nail bed forever. You learn to stop looking at it. I'd hired the suit from a place in the city. Maybe, decent cut, the bloke behind the counter told me it brought out my shoulders, which I didn't really know what to do with. I'd even swapped my boots, my steel-capped Blundstones, the ones with the heels worn down at an angle from years of standing on concrete, for a pair of black lace-ups that pinched. I only had the Blundstones on in the car park, walking in. Habit. Old habit. See, here's the thing folks don't always cotton on to straight away. Evelyn Cross isn't my full sister. Different dads. Same mum, who we lost, cancer, quick and mean about it, when Evelyn was 11 and I was 21. I'd just taken over the workshop from my old man 2 years before that. No plan for raising a kid. No practice run. Just me, a girl who cried in her sleep for the first year, and a business that had to feed 2 mouths instead of 1. I'm not telling you that for a medal. I'm telling you so you understand what it meant when she stood on the toes of my work boots. She'd have been about 5. I can still feel the weight of her, dead honest, little hands gripping my knees, her school shoes, no, not school shoes yet, she was too small, just her little pink runners, planted right on top of my steel caps, and I'd clomp around the workshop floor between the hoist and the parts shelf while she shrieked with laughter, hanging on for grim life. Faster, Deck. Faster. Like I was a cart horse. Like the whole world was that patch of concrete and diesel smell and her laughing so hard she'd nearly slip off. I used to think about that a lot, later on. More than I probably should have. Anyway. Back to the hallway. Back to the door with the shell-shaped handle. I want to be straight with you about something, because I'm not interested in making myself out a saint here. When I heard her voice through that door, I didn't feel rage first. I felt the stupid, hollow sort of surprise, like when you go to step onto a stair that isn't there. Because I paid for half that wedding, folks. Not all of it. Mason's people had plenty, more than plenty by the look of the marquee out front, all white orchids and a string quartet warming up somewhere I couldn't see. But the deposit on the venue, the hen's weekend in the Hunter Valley, even the shoes Evelyn had cried over in a shop window on Oxford Street, that had come out of the workshop account, same as it always had. 14 years I'd been the standing order behind that girl's life. Rent when she was between share houses. Uni fees the government loan didn't cover. A car when her first one died on the M4. Not once had I begrudged a cent of it. And now here she was, in a dress that cost more than my Uda, telling me through 6 centimeters of painted timber to stay where I was. A woman came out a side door then, one of the wedding planner types, headset and clipboard, very brisk, very sorry not sorry in her face, and she said, not unkindly, Mr. O'Connor? Perhaps she'd be more comfortable having a drink out on the terrace. Which is a lovely way of saying, get out of the corridor before the guests see you. I want you to picture the terrace, because I stood on it for a good 40 minutes and I remember every inch. Sydney Harbour laid out below like it belonged to somebody, sailboats leaning on the wind, and up on that terrace, waiters gliding round with little trays of something involving prawns, and men in suits that made my rented one look like a school uniform. I heard one of them, tall, sandy-haired, the kind of tan you get from actual holidays rather than actual work, say to another, low enough that he probably thought it was low enough. Apparently the bride's got a brother who's some sort of trot-eye. Turns spanners for a living. Can you imagine, at this wedding? That was Mason's crowd. And somewhere in amongst them, I'd learn later, was Mason himself, 27 years old, North Shore raised, teeth like a toothpaste advert, the kind of handshake that's just a fraction too firm because somebody once told him that's what confidence feels like. I never got a proper look at him that day. Just a shape across the lawn, laughing with his hand on some other bloke's shoulder, not once glancing toward the corridor where my sister had just told me not to exist. Here's what nobody in that marquee understood, and what I didn't say to a single soul. I wasn't angry about the insult. I'd had worse said to my face by better men. What sat in my chest like a swallowed stone was this: Evelyn hadn't fought for me. Not one word. Not, he's family, he's staying. Just that little apologetic sentence through a locked door, and then silence, and then a string quartet starting up canon in D like nothing at all had happened. I stood on that terrace and finished a glass of French champagne I didn't taste, and I watched the harbor, and I thought about a girl standing on my boots in a workshop that smelled like motor oil and rust, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Then I put the glass down on a passing tray, walked to the car park without saying goodbye to a living soul, and got into my Uda still wearing the pinching black shoes. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you, folks, because I think there's something almost worse than crying, and it's what actually happened, which is that my hands were completely steady on the wheel. Steadier than they'd been in weeks. I pulled my phone out before I'd even started the engine and rang a fella I know, Barry Chen, does commercial property round the eastern suburbs and the inner west, decent bloke, sponsors the local footy club, and when he picked up I didn't do any small talk. Barry. It's December. The workshop and the block it's sitting on, I want it listed. Today, if you can swing it. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear someone deciding whether to ask the obvious question. To his credit, Barry didn't ask why. He just said, "You sure, mate? That land's worth a hell of a lot more than the shop sitting on it, you know that. Rezoning's coming through that whole strip." "I know exactly what it's worth," I said. And I did. That was the thing nobody at that wedding knew, not Evelyn, not Mason with his firm handshake and his North Shore teeth, not one single person eating prawns on that terrace with the harbor glittering behind them like it was putting on a show just for their money. That block of land had been quietly, steadily becoming worth a fortune for about 2 years, ever since the council started talking rezoning for the whole strip out past the container yards. I'd never said a word about it to Evelyn. Never saw the need. It was hers as much as mine. In the way things are between people who've raised each other, I figured she'd inherit half of whatever it became one day, and that would just be that. I started the Uda. The engine caught rough, the way it always did in cold weather, and I sat there a second with my hand on the gear stick, looking at my own reflection ghosted over the dashboard, a man in a suit that brought out his shoulders, wearing shoes that weren't his. I don't know exactly when it happened, whether it was standing outside that door, or on the terrace with the harbor laid out like a lie, or right there in the car park with Barry's voice still in my ear, but somewhere in that hour, something in me that had been holding on for 14 years just let go. Clean. Quiet. Like a bolt finally coming loose after you'd stopped expecting it to. I never went back inside. I never found out what Evelyn wore for the reception, never tasted the cake, never shook the hand of the man she'd just married. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't understand for months, was why a man with a harbourside wedding and a family everyone called old money would need, so badly and so fast, to make sure his new wife's only family was standing on a terrace instead of inside that room. I kicked off the black shoes somewhere around the M8, drove the rest of the way home in my socks, and by the time I pulled into my own driveway in Merrickville, the workshop, the one my father built, the one Evelyn had learned to walk on the toes of my boots inside, already had a real estate sign order sitting in my inbox, waiting on my signature. Barry had the sign up within the week. One of those glossy Corflow boards, planted right where the container trucks turn off Botany Road, my father's name still half visible under the primer where the old O'Connor mechanical sign used to hang before I painted over it. I stood looking at it the morning it went up, coffee in hand, and I remember thinking it looked like a headstone. Which is a strange thing to think about a block of land, but there it is. Evelyn rang me 4 days after the wedding. Not before. 4 days. Deck, what the hell is going on? Barry Chen's assistant called Mom's old solicitor asking about the deed history and I nearly had a heart attack. What are you doing? Not are you okay? Not I'm sorry about the door. Straight to the deed history, straight to the thing that touched her. Selling it, I said. Told you I would. You didn't tell me anything, you can't just sell it, Deck, that land's half mine too, Mom would have wanted, Mom's not here to want anything, Ev. I kept my voice level. I'd had 4 days to get it level. You'll get your half of whatever it clears. Lawyers drawing it up proper. There was a silence on the line long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then, quieter, in a voice I recognized from when she was about 9 and had broken something of Mom's, is this about the wedding? No, I said, which was a lie, and we both knew it was a lie, and neither of us called it one. Declan. She never used my full name unless she was frightened. The rent on our place, Mason and I, we've got the mortgage sorted for now, but the reno, the fit out, all of that was supposed to come through eventually from the shop, you always said, and there it was. Not I miss you. Not I'm sorry I let a door happen. The money. The tap she'd never once had to think about, because I'd never let her think about it, was making a noise like it might run dry, and that was the emergency. I stood in my kitchen holding a mug that had gone cold in my hand and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold too, matching it. You'll be right, Ev, I told her. You'll get your half. She didn't ask about the workshop. Didn't ask where I'd go, what I'd do with my hands for the rest of my working life, whether I was all right. She asked, one more time, when the money would land, and I told her I didn't know yet, and she hung up sounding like a woman who'd just been told a storm was coming but not which day. I want to tell you what I did that night, because it matters later. I went out to the shed behind the workshop where we kept the stuff too sentimental to throw and too useless to sell, old parts catalogs, a dartboard with half the flights missing, boxes that had been Mom's. Down in one of those boxes, wrapped in a jumper that used to be mine, I found a little pair of pink runners, size 4 toddler, the rubber gone brittle and cracked with age. Not the Blundstones. Those were mine, always mine, the ones she used to stand on. These were her own first proper shoes, the ones from before she was even big enough to reach my boot tops. I don't know why I kept them all those years. I don't know why finding them that night, of all nights, put a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I just sat on an upturned milk crate in that shed for a good 20 minutes, turning a pair of shoes no bigger than my palm over in my hands, while somewhere out past the fence a container ship's horn went off low and long, the way they do at night out there, like the whole harbor's clearing its throat. 3 weeks after that, Mason rang me directly for the first time in his life. I want you to understand something about that phone call before I tell you what was said, because the tone of it is the whole story. Mason Fletcher didn't ring like a man asking a favor. He rang like a man who'd already decided the meeting was happening, and was just letting me know the time. Declan. Mason here. Thought it'd be good if we grabbed a coffee, mate to mate. Clear the air a bit. Mate to mate. From the man whose wedding I'd watched from a terrace like a stray dog someone led onto the property out of pity. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe because some small, stupid part of me, the same part that had hired a suit that brought out my shoulders, still wanted to believe there was a version of this where the family sat down and someone apologized and it all got fixed over a flat white. So I said yes, and he picked a cafe in Double Bay that charged $9 for a coffee that came in a cup the size of an egg cup, and he was 15 minutes late, and he didn't apologize for that either. He looked good. I'll give him that. Sandy hair combed back, one of those quarter-zip jumpers that costs more than a week of parts orders, a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, which he did a lot, like he wanted you to notice it. Look, he said, before I'd even got my coffee in front of me, I know things got off on a bit of a wrong foot. The wedding, all that. Edie's family's important to her, and by extension, important to me. She told me not to come in, I said. He waved a hand, like he was swatting away something small and irritating. Nerves. Big day, lots of moving parts, my mother can be, look, that's not why I asked you here. Here it comes, I thought. And here it came. I'll be straight with you, Declan, because I respect a man who works with his hands, I really do, salt of the earth stuff. He said salt of the earth the way you'd describe a dog breed. That block out past botany, I've had it looked at. Zoning's about to flip, you'd know that better than me probably, but I've had people run the numbers, and mate, it's worth an absolute mint. An absolute mint. I'm aware. Right, course you are. A little laugh, quick, covering something. Here's the thing. Rather than you going through all the hassle of a public sale, agents, open homes, God knows who trampling through, what if we kept it in the family? I buy it off you direct. Fair price, obviously, better than fair, and it stays, you know, close. For Edie. For the kids, one day. There is a particular kind of quiet that happens in your own head when you finally understand what's being asked of you underneath what's being said. I had that quiet then, sitting across a marble cafe table from a man in a jumper that cost more than my week's takings, holding a coffee I hadn't touched. Why do you want it, Mason? I kept my voice easy, the way you keep your voice easy around a spooked horse. You've got North Shore. You've got all that. What's one workshop block to you? Something moved behind his eyes, quick, like a fish under water, gone before I could name it. Diversification, he said. Smart money spreads around. You'd understand that, wouldn't you, being in business? I would, I said. Which is why I've already got an agent handling it. Open market. Best price, whoever it comes from. His jaw did a small thing, a tightening, just at the hinge. First crack in the paint. Declan. He leaned forward. Dropped the maid-to-maid voice for something underneath it, something with an edge on it I hadn't heard yet. I don't think you understand how this works. Evie's my wife now. This family, my family, we look after our own, and quite frankly, that block sitting there half derelict with a rusted-out workshop on it doesn't reflect well on anyone, does it? On any of us. Sell it to me, keep it civil, and Edie's taken care of. Properly taken care of. The way she should have been all along, instead of being propped up by a mechanic shop. There it was. Propped up. As if 16 years of school shoes and rent and a car that didn't die on the motorway was some shameful scaffolding he'd noticed and wanted torn down before the neighbors saw. I sat very still. I have this thing I do with my hands when I'm holding something in. I press my thumb into the pad of my palm, hard, where an old burn scar sits from a manifold I grabbed too soon back when I was 22 and hadn't learned patience yet. I did that under the table while Mason waited for his answer with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once in his life been told no by somebody he needed something from. No, I said. Just that. One word. And folks, I want you to know, it cost me more to say than anything I said at that wedding. Mason's face did something interesting then, not anger exactly, not yet, more like a man recalculating a sum that had come out wrong twice in a row. You're going to want to think about that, he said, quieter now, and there was nothing maid-to-mate left in it at all. Because family's a two-way street, Declan. Evie's my responsibility now. What happens to her, comfort, security, whether she's got a brother in her life at all, that's got a lot more moving parts than one bit of land. I understood, sitting there, that I had just been threatened by a man in a very expensive jumper, over an egg cup of coffee, in front of a barista steaming milk 12 feet away, and that he'd done it so smoothly he could deny every word of it if I ever repeated it to a living soul. I didn't say anything else. I stood up, left a $10 note under my full cup, and walked out into the double bay sun with my ears ringing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept circling back to the same stupid, small detail, the way you do when your mind's trying to protect itself from the big terrifying one. I thought about the workshop's petty cash tin, how I used to slip Evelyn $2 for the school canteen out of it every Friday morning when she was little, how she'd stand on the toes of my boots waiting for it like it was a ritual, hand out, grinning. 2 days after the cafe, dropping some last tools round the workshop before the settlement paperwork went through, I found the folder. It wasn't even hidden. That's the part that still gets me. It was sitting on the passenger seat of Mason's car. He'd left it unlocked in the yard while he had a look round the property one more time, walking the boundary like a man pricing a coat he already planned to steal. I wasn't snooping. I was moving a stack of his own printed valuations off my Uda's tray where he'd left them, and the folder slid out with them, and it fell open on the gravel, and there, staring up at me in black and white with a bank's logo across the top, was a name I recognized, Fletcher Group Holdings, next to a figure with more red in front of it than any figure I'd ever seen in my life. Notices. 3 of them. Different banks. The kind of language that doesn't leave much room for hope, default, arrears, final demand. I stood in that gravel yard with a folder of somebody else's ruin in my hands, and the last piece I still needed, the one thing that had been sitting underneath every single moment since that door with the shell-shaped handle. Why a man that rich needed a workshop block that badly, why he'd cut my sister off from me so fast it barely gave the wedding cake time to go stale, clicked into place with a sound I swear I actually heard, somewhere behind my own ribs. I put the folder back exactly as it had fallen, gravel dust and all, and I didn't say a word to Mason when he wandered back round the corner of the shed a minute later, sunnies pushed up on his head, telling me the block had good bones, real good bones, like he was talking about a horse he meant to buy cheap and flip. I just nodded and told him the agent would be in touch, and I watched him drive off in a car that, I now knew, probably wasn't even paid off. It took me the better part of a fortnight to find out the rest, and I want to be honest, folks, I didn't dig for it out of spite. I rang an old customer of mine, Raj, does the books for half the trot-eyes in the eastern suburbs, and I asked him, casual as I could manage, whether he'd ever heard of Fletcher Group Holdings. He laughed down the phone, not a nice laugh. Told me they were 3 property developments deep in a market that had turned on them, 2 Sydney apartment blocks half-built and stalled, subcontractors owed money going back the better part of a year, and a family name that had been coasting on its grandfather's reputation for a lot longer than anyone in Double Bay wanted to admit out loud. Mason's father, Raj said, had remortgaged the family home twice. The wedding, the marquee, the string quartet, the orchids flown in from God knows where, every bit of that had gone straight onto a credit card that was, in Raj's words, hanging on by its fingernails. They weren't old money at all, not anymore. They were old money's ghost, still wearing the good suit to the funeral of its own fortune, and Mason had needed one thing, fast, to keep the whole rotting structure standing a bit longer, a piece of land worth, once rezoned, more than everything else his family owned put together. And the fastest way to get his hands on it wasn't to court me. It was to marry my sister, cut her off from the one person who might warn her, and let her, sweetly, lovingly, without her even understanding what she was doing, talk her big brother into signing it over for family. I sat with that for 2 days before I did anything about it. Not because I was scared of Mason. Because I kept picturing Evelyn's face if I told her straight, and I kept remembering that call, comfort, the fit-out, the mortgage, when's the money landing, and some ugly, honest little voice in me said, she might not believe you. She might choose him anyway. And I didn't know if I could survive finding that out. In the end, I didn't ring Evelyn at all. I signed the sale that Friday, not to Mason, never going to be to Mason, but to a proper buyer Barry had lined up, a logistics mob who wanted the whole strip for a depot, settled and unconditional inside 3 weeks, money already moving. I did it at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, biro in a slightly shaking hand, BB going flat beside the paperwork, and when I signed the last page I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like the bloke setting down something heavy he'd been carrying so long his arms had forgotten what light felt like. Word got to Mason before it got to Evelyn, apparently. Word gets round fast in that world, I've learned. Real estate agents talk, bank managers talk, And a settlement that size doesn't happen quietly on the North Shore grapevine. I heard, secondhand, through Barry, that Mason rang the agent twice in one afternoon trying to insert himself into a deal that had already closed. There was nothing left for him to insert himself into. It was gone. Clean. 3 months went by before Evelyn turned up at the workshop. I say workshop, by then it was an empty shell, stripped of the hoist, the parts shelves gone to auction, just bare concrete and the ghost shape on the wall where the O'Connor mechanical sign used to hang, a rectangle of paint slightly less faded than the wall around it. New owners hadn't started their fit-out yet. I'd been given a fortnight's grace to clear out the last odds and ends, and that's where she found me, on a Tuesday, standing in an empty room with a broom in my hand and nowhere left to sweep it. She looked different. Thinner in the face. No wedding ring flash under the fluorescent light, though I noticed the ring itself was still on. "They're separating," she said, before I'd even put the broom down. No hello. Straight to it, the same way she'd once gone straight to the money on the phone, except this time her voice was cracked right down the middle. "The business is gone, December. Properly gone. His dad's, there's people coming to the house next week to value the furniture." I didn't say anything. I just leaned the broom against the wall. "Did you know," she said. "About the money. About all of it. Before you sold." "Found a folder in his car," I said. "By accident. Bank letters. Notices." She flinched like I'd hit her, though I hadn't raised my voice at all. "And you never told me. Would you have believed me, F?" I asked it plain, no edge on it, because I genuinely wanted to know. 3 weeks married. Whole family telling you you'd finally arrived somewhere. Would you have believed your grease monkey brother over a bloke in a house on the water? She opened her mouth to answer fast, the way people do when they want to defend themselves before they've actually thought about the question, and then she stopped. Really stopped. I watched something cross her face that I hadn't seen since she was about 17 and got caught out in a lie about where she'd really been on a Saturday night, that particular kind of shame that only comes when you can't blame anyone else for what you already, secretly, knew. "No," she said, finally. Barely above a whisper. "I don't think I would have. God, December. I don't think I would have." She started crying then, not the pretty, camera-ready kind, but the ugly kind, shoulders going, and she didn't try to hide it from me, which I think was the first properly honest thing she'd done in front of me in about 2 years. "I told you not to come in," she said, through it. "On the one day. The one day you'd never asked me for anything, and I told you to stay outside a door because his mother made a face." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive that. I know that too." We stood there a minute, in that stripped bare room that used to smell like engine oil and now just smelled like empty paint and dust, and folks, I want to tell you the truth of it, I didn't feel a big wave of relief wash over me, no swelling music, none of that. I felt tired. Tired in a way that had been building for 14 years and had finally found somewhere to set itself down. "I never needed you to be grateful, Av," I said. "Not once. Not for the rent, not for the shoes, not for any of it. I just needed you to believe, one time, that I was worth letting through a door." She didn't say anything to that. There wasn't really anything to say. Some things you can't apologize your way past, you can only carry them differently afterwards, and I think, watching her face right then, she understood that as well as I did. Before she left, she asked me, quiet, almost like she didn't want to hear the answer, whether I hated Mason. "No," I told her, and meant it. "Man's scared out of his mind and been that way probably since he was about 10 years old, watching his old man pretend everything's fine while the walls come down round him. Doesn't make what he did to you right. Doesn't make what he tried to do to me right either. But it's not the same as being rotten clean through. He's just a bloke who chose the worst version of surviving, and now he's got to live in whatever's left of the house he built on it." She left not long after. Not a dramatic exit, she just hugged me, quick, the way you hug someone you're still working out how to be family with again, and walked out to her car, And I stood in the empty room and listened to the sound of it pulling away down Botany Road, past the container yards, same as always. I had one last thing to do before I handed the keys over for good. Out in the Uta, wrapped in an old towel, were my boots, the Blundstones, steel-capped, worn down at the heel on an angle from half a lifetime of standing on that exact stretch of concrete. I'd already bought a new pair for whatever came next, whatever workshop or yard or life I ended up building somewhere else. These ones had done their job. I carried them in and set them down in the very middle of that empty room, side by side, toes pointing at the front door, right about where the hoist used to stand, right about where a 5-year-old girl in pink runners had once climbed onto the toes of them and shrieked at me to go faster. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said, badly, imperfectly, standing in that same room an hour before. I locked up, handed the keys to the agent the next morning, and drove off in a pair of new boots that hadn't yet learned the shape of my feet, while somewhere behind me, in an empty room that would soon belong to somebody else entirely, an old pair of steel-capped boots sat exactly where a girl once learned to walk on somebody else's strength, waiting for nobody. Mates, I think about that room more than I probably should. Not the wedding, not the coffee that cost more than a coolant flush, not even the folder in Mason's car. Just that empty room, the two of them sitting there in the dust with the light coming in wrong because there weren't any curtains left. I've been back to Botany Road exactly once since. Depot's up now, proper industrial shed, forklifts running where the hoist used to be. I sat in the Uta across the road for a bit, engine off, and I couldn't have told you what I was hoping to feel. Grief, maybe. I didn't get any. What I got instead was that same tired stillness from the kitchen table the night I signed, except lighter now, like a load you've been carrying so long you'd started thinking it was part of your own spine, and then one day you set it down and your back just doesn't know what to do with all that room. Evelyn and I talk now. Not every week. Enough. She's renting a little unit out near Merrickville, not far from me actually, and last month she asked if I'd come round and fix a wobbly kitchen tap, and I did, and she made instant coffee in mugs that didn't match, and neither of us mentioned Mason once, and it was, without a doubt, the easiest hour we'd spent together in about 3 years. New workshop smaller. Rented, not owned, out past Alexandria, half the size of the old one. I don't mind it. There's a particular sound a good gearbox makes when it finally seats right after you've been fighting it for an hour, this low clean click, and I still get the same stupid satisfaction out of that sound I got at 19, which tells me some things in a bloke don't actually change no matter what gets taken off him or what he decides to let go of on his own. I kept the little pink runners. Never told Evelyn I still had them. They're in a box on a shelf in my new place, size 4, rubber bone the color of weak tea, and every so often I open that box for no particular reason and just look at them a minute before I put the lid back on. The Blundstones I left in that empty room, though, those I never went back for, and I never will. Somebody hosed the floors before the new tenants moved in, someone told me, chucked out whatever rubbish was left lying about, boots included, probably straight into a skip bin round the back without a second thought. That doesn't bother me the way you'd think it might. They'd been on that concrete since I was 19. They'd carried a 5-year-old girl in pink runners who thought her brother's feet were the safest place in the world. That's not a bad run for a pair of boots.